Thank you so much, Mike. That was really
Oh,
good.
cut. Oh,
Can you hear me okay?
yeah,
You
good.
got me. Yeah, thank you so much, Mike. That was really brilliant. Thank you for taking us through that. I know there is a ton of information. It was really comprehensive. We do have a few minutes and I have a few questions just to go through, if that's okay, before we move on to the next steps, if that's all right.
Certainly.
So if I could take us back to the beginning when you were talking about the different types of procurement process and tenders, and you were talking about the restricted process, and that's where the contracting authority will take people through selection, but they will only be inviting, say, the top 5, you said, I think in the example, through to actually tender. Does the contracting authority have to say upfront when they advertise the selection process how many they'll be taking through to tender?
Yes, they do. It's really interesting. So, the best and clearest way that they can do this is they will say, we will take through five bidders. That's what they'll say. Really, really, as again, sticking with that example, what you often see is language like, we will take through up to 5 bidders. Or,
Right.
or between 5 and 10 or things like that. So sometimes that language is softener, and that's still okay with the regulations, but they're giving themselves a little bit of space there. So the regulations say that you need to be clear, but actually, again, certainly I've seen over the years that clarity sometimes gives the contracting authority a little bit of wiggle room, which is okay. Because actually, if I had, let's say, if you were in the contracting authority and you've said up to 5, and actually you only receive 3, well, then you can only take through 3. So that's up to 5. So that ticks that box. But equally, if you said between 5 and 10, you want that minimum 5. But actually, if you got, let's say, a 6 bid that was really, really good, or you only got 6 bids in total, then there'll be no reason to disqualify that one person. You want to bring them into the competition. So you hopefully, if it's done properly, your contracting authority will actually give you some really good clues around that about exactly what they're trying to do. And they'll also have left themselves a little bit of wiggle room that still meets the needs of the regulations.
Brilliant. Thank you, Mike. That's really helpful, I think. Do you, and forgive me, you might not know, I don't know the answer to this. Do you happen to know what the split of competitions are between open to everybody,
Oh,
or restricted?
so
Just to, give people some guidance.
yeah, I can give you a bit of history for it. I don't know for certain, but I can tell you where this has been. So
Okay.
Uh, back in about 2011, 2012, the Cabinet Office did a piece of work on this, and their findings were that the majority of kind of contracting authorities, so central government, local government, and kind of NHS and people like that, were actually doing restricted as a default procedure. So everything that they were doing, or 90% of what they were doing, was all this restricted procedures. And one of the things that the government said is, the Cabinet Office said, is actually there's no reason to do that. You should do the most appropriate process for what you're buying. And so what they did is they did a kind of a sheep dip training program across all of central government to basically say this message and say, actually, you need to do a simple decision tree and say, do we think the market is huge? Do we think that we need to kind of clamp it down to 5 people? And if we don't, then we should do an open procedure as default. So going back to about kind of 2012, 2013, what a lot of central government departments did was they made the open procedure their default procedure as part of that. So going into when the regulations changed, the default became open. Now, the caveat I said at the beginning there, I don't know where we are now, but what I would say is by sector, a lot of buying habits tend to be the use of frameworks. So, for example, I do a lot of work with the NHS, and every NHS trust that I've dealt with recently probably does about 80% of their procurements through frameworks, either direct awards or mini competition of frameworks. Now, again, that's just my perception rather than the hard and fast kind of survey, as it were. But actually, I think that's a lot of that comes down to the time it takes, because when somebody else has done the framework, they've done the heavy lifting for you. You can do a procedure that might have taken you 3 months in 2 or 3 weeks. And also it reduces the risk of legal challenge because it's already been through that legal kind of loop and has already been kind of competed via the regulations. So yeah, so I think if you were to ask me now, what do most people default to? My gut feel would be probably mini competitions or frameworks by volume. That's what most people I think are doing at the moment.
Okay, and that's a nice segue actually into the next question, which is about a dynamic purchasing system, a DPS.
Mm.
And if in your opinion, you're seeing DPS is becoming more popular to frameworks. And just for anybody who's listening, a dynamic procurement system or purchasing system acts a bit like a framework, but it's basically always open. So where a framework is let, and if you're on it, you're on it, and however long it's then out for, you can't join it. In a DPS, you can join all the time that it's open. And they typically, I think, like, correct me if I'm wrong, seem to be out for longer than a framework would be, a dynamic purchasing system.
Yeah.
Are you seeing more of those come around in public procurement?
Yeah, I think so. I think they just as you're saying there, Jill, one of the issues with kind of frameworks is, you know, your users of the framework and the supplies on the framework are fixed, and that's usually for 4 years. It can be extended under exceptional circumstances, but it's usually 4 years. And if you're in a very, using that same word, a very dynamic marketplace, your half of your suppliers might have gone bust in the first year, leaving you with a handful of kind of coverage. And if you're looking for, let's say, geographical area coverage, it might be that you now have gaps in your kind of your ability to deliver your services. So yeah, so this dynamic purchasing system model has become very popular. Certainly over the last 2 or 3 years, I've seen quite a few more of them. Because that allows you to just add suppliers as they go. So when you for the kind of people who are interested in bidding for these kind of things, when you see a DPS being advertised, you can join it when it's first advertised, or you can join it at any time during its life. You know, that's absolutely fine. So you don't have to do it on day one. If you want to come back to it 6 months later when you've got more time to do your kind of your bid, you can then do those kind of things. And the contracting authority has to then actually kind of acknowledge back to you that you are on that framework within so many days. They've got a very short period of doing that. So if you meet the criteria, you're on, and they have to tell you that you're on. And then once you're on, you get the opportunity to bid for any competition that comes through that. So yeah, short answer, Jill, yes, I've seen more of those. And I think in the new version of the regulations, we're likely to see a hybrid model that's kind of like half a DPS and half a framework. And I certainly wait with bated breath to see what that looks like.
Yeah, no, absolutely, me too. And final question, if that's okay. When we were talking about the specification, which I thought was really great to go through, if a business is reading this specification and thinking, actually, you're buying the wrong thing, that's not, you know, either that technology doesn't exist yet, or that technology is archaic, that you're like, we're on version 27 plus now, and you should be using that because that's more cost effective. How could a business go back to a contracting authority when a competition's live to say, actually, I don't think this spec is right?
Yeah, that's a really good point. And again, as a buyer, I would always rather somebody told me from the industry say that doesn't work, or Oracle 10 hasn't been supported since 2012, or those kind of things. So there is a mechanism called a clarification question. So an electronic portal, all this stuff is generally done through electronic portals now, like Bravo, Jaeger, Intend, Due North, various different kind of versions of these. And actually, there's always an opportunity there for you to have a communications route. So any questions you have, any clarifications you need, you can ask through that route. Equally, if you see something you don't like, that's the way to tell them. That's the formal route of communication. And if they're a decent public sector buying organisation, they will take your concerns seriously and do something about it.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you so much.